The governor of the Bank of Canada has told a central bank conference on diversity and equity that the economics discipline is having a Me Too reckoning. Tiff Macklem acknowledged that his female colleagues have faced harassment that he has never had to face. But Mr. Macklem told the event in Toronto that he's worked to create a culture of respect at the Bank of Canada. He adds that harassment of any kind can never be ignored, excused, or brushed away. Well, joining us now to continue this conversation is Dr. Marina Adshade. She is an economics and public policy professor at the University of British Columbia and an economics expert on the role of women in society. Dr. Adshade, welcome to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, we know that women have been speaking out against harassment and sexual abuse in the workforce for years, decades even. So, what is the current state of this issue in the economic sector in particular?
So economics is very male dominated. And in the last couple of years, when we've had the Me Too movement, a lot of the very male dominated industries have had to face the fact that it's just simply more difficult for women in those industries. Women face a lot of harassment, they face a lot of discrimination. And just like the governor of the Bank of Canada said, they face a lot of circumstances that the men just don't simply face. What's been kind of interesting is that whereas the Me Too movement in general started years ago, economics kind of managed to slide under the radar for a few years. But things have really accelerated in the last, I would say, 6 weeks in economics, where there's been it started as a trickle and then it turned into a wave of women coming forward and um, bringing forward their complaints about the way that they are treated, the way they're treated at conferences, the way they're treated when they present their research. And it's really forced the profession as a whole to have this conversation.
Now, Mr. Macklem is calling this a Me Too reckoning. So, what does that look like in the economics industry? What does he mean by Me Too reckoning?
I think that it's so interesting because, of course, the women in economics have been having this conversation. As you said, we've been having this conversation for decades. And economics, I think, has had a recognition that it has a gender problem. So that part isn't really new. The reckoning, I think, is that there are some individuals who are having to face some consequences for their own behavior, and that really is the reckoning. And some fairly high profile economists have been called out for their behavior, and publicly. And of course, I think the profession is known as a whole that there's a number of people who have been problematic over the years, but now it's become very public, and so that's been very uncomfortable for the profession as a whole.
And it's interesting that Mr. Macklem made these remarks along with news of an economic slowdown. So, how does the issue of harassment in the economics discipline impact the overall economy?
Well, I mean, I'm unsurprised the Bank of Canada make the statement. Canada is actually, I think, very, very forward thinking when it comes to gender, and they've worked quite hard for gender equality within the bank. And the reason they've done that is not just because of a sense of fairness, but actually everybody benefits when we have better gender representation in the economics profession. Because of course, economists do research that guide policymakers, and those policies affect everyone in the economy, including women. And if we don't have women's voices in the economics profession, it adversely affects policies, but also it's not good for economic growth. It's not good for the general health of the economy to have only one group of people's voices represented.
And are there any certain sectors in the economic discipline that are facing harassment more than others? As you say, the Bank of Canada is quite the leader when it comes to equality. So, are there any certain sectors that are facing this issue more?
Yeah, I mean, so finance is particularly has a particularly bad reputation. Central banking actually, outside of the Bank of Canada, has quite a bad reputation, and macroeconomics, which is kind of both of those things come under that umbrella. Those are the professions that traditionally have been very male dominated. They are very masculine professions. It's if I could just tell you a quick story, as a friend of mine went to a macro conference, and she says the nice thing about macro conferences is that when she goes to the bathroom, there's so few women she can cry there all by herself because the conferences are very, very difficult for women. So it's really, he's in the right position to be making these comments because it really is those areas of economics that have been problematic, most problematic.
Clearly, a conversation that needs to happen. Now, a really quick 20 seconds left here, Doctor, but if you could leave us with one message for officials when it comes to addressing this, what would it be?
I would say that if we care about economic growth, if we care about standards of living, these gender issues, they're not just about fairness. They're really best for the overall health of the economy, and they need to be addressed so that Canada can be competitive with other nations that are addressing this pretty proactively.
And Dr. Adshade, thank you again for your time today on Forum Daily.
Well, thank you for having me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break on Forum Daily News.